Let's find out more about the guests of Ski Tip Ranch. One day, a most handsome young man arrived, resplendent in cowboy attire. He announced he had come to stay for 2 months because he wanted to become a ski instructor. He was a Colorado native. His family had several ranches near the foothills in northern Colorado. He caused quite a stir among the female skiers from Chicago. 90% of our guests came from the Chicago area in those early ski years. I was the breakfast cook, and Don the cowboy didn't think much of my pancakes. The following morning, he marched into the kitchen and took over. For the next 2 months, he made the most delicious pancakes. We had apple pancakes, pecan, blueberry, and any kind you can imagine. They were terrific. His first attempt was a disaster, though. He had prepared the sourdough the night before, and by next morning it had overflowed onto the floor. What a sticky mess. This started a trend. With handsome Don in the kitchen, we had a problem keeping the female guests out. It wasn't the first or last time that guests would take over the kitchen. I remember especially one time in the early days of Ski Tip when I'd been over to Aspen to ski and ran into Max Schiff there on the mountain. I had planned to ski until noon, getting back to Ski Tip early as it was my night to cook. With the drive home, a 3-hour one, I was sure I could pick up some steaks in Dillon on the way and still arrive around 4 p.m. In my hurry to ski, I'd forgotten to pick up an instructor's pass, so I looked for an instructor friend. Sandy Sabatini was in the line ahead of Max and me. Telling him I'd forgotten to get a pass, I asked for help. Sandy said that when he was loading his class, he'd tell the lift loader to let me on. No problem. We got to Midway, where another friend was with his class, and he told the next loader to let me on. We skied all morning, hating to stop as the snow was perfect, but all good things must come to an end, and I put my skis on the car while saying auf Wiedersehen. Max S. laughed. Those lift loaders were so concerned about remembering you were to ride free that they never once checked me. I'd forgotten to get a ticket too. Back in Dillon, I bought the steaks at the old Falls Front grocery. John Sundrager, the owner, made sure they were cut just as I wanted them. When I drove up to the back door of Ski Tip Ranch, I could see a lot of activity going on in the kitchen. There must have been at least 6 guests running around. What's going on? I asked. Pretty Hannah Gibbs, who had driven up from Pueblo with her husband, looked up from the chopping block with a big meat cleaver in her hand. She said, "We were afraid you wouldn't get home in time. We found all this frozen hamburger in the freezer. Thought if we chopped it up, it would thaw faster and we could have hamburgers. We've got some of the guests setting the table. Peter here is peeling carrots and potatoes." Matter-of-factly, she started hacking away at the hamburger as bits of it flew all over. I looked at the wall, all spattered with meat, and couldn't help laughing. "Stop that, Hannah," I ordered. "We've got marvelous steaks from Dillon. I'll take over, but thanks loads. I really appreciate all this. Please go in by the fireplace and brew me up a drink. I'll need one. I'll tell you later all about my adventures in Aspen. By the way, Matt Schiff sends his best to all of you. He'll be along to ski here in a couple of days." I realized that all my guests knew each other, and by now they were good old friends, even though they came from various parts of the country. Not only did the guests help, They also disrupted the kitchen. One evening after dinner, I was walking by the basement door. Having just left the living room where Max was playing the clarinet to the accompaniment of a guest playing the piano with one finger of each hand, I heard pounding in the basement. I had to see who was down there in the black hole of Calcutta, as we dubbed it. Bill Gatra? I was astounded. What on earth are you doing down here? I'm rebuilding those darn dining room benches so you don't fall off one end when someone stands up at the other end. Max had realized he'd made a mistake by building the legs of the benches too close to the middle, but everyone thought it was funny to play Spill the New Guest. However, realizing Mr. Galtra was very happy down there, I left him to it. Years later, we were invited to visit Bill and Pauline Galtra at their incredible estate outside of Chicago. We were greeted with love and warmth. They came back year after year to the little room in the old wing with the two baths down the hall. They and their two sons became proficient skiers. One evening during dinner, Mrs. Galtra was called to the phone. She returned to the table completely overwhelmed. It was the Chicago police. They've arrested our Yugoslavian gardener for murder. I was as astounded as she was. We had seen him when we visited the Galtras, and he appeared to be very mild and harmless. By dessert time, someone called Mrs. G to the phone again. I hadn't heard the phone ring, so was immediately suspicious. I rushed upstairs to my room where there was an extension. My door was wide open, and I could hear a clicking sound. One of our ski bums, Sue, was holding the phone to her ear as the oldest Galtra son was slowly making the clicking sound with an egg beater held close to the phone. While I watched, unnoticed, Sue was saying, "Mrs. Galtra, this is Western Union. We have the telegram for you. Garden Club treasurer absconded with all the funds." I didn't wait to hear more, but rushed downstairs just as Pauline was seating herself again at the table. I knew it. I just knew I couldn't trust that woman. Looking up at me, she added, "There is something fishy going on, isn't there, Edna?" I invited her upstairs to catch her son and Sue in hysterics with her son still waving the egg beater. Being the terrific sport she was, we all had a great laugh together and with the other guests back in the living room. Probably the craziest guest antics occurred when we had a group belonging to the Chicago Social Register, complete with their own news writer from the Chicago Tribune. Some of our old-time Chicago guests were already at the lodge. Before supper, I was preparing a tray of hot mulled wine to serve this group of guests around the fireplace. We had no bar yet at that time. "I'll do that," one of the old-time guests, Jeannie, said to me as she took the tray from me. "Let me serve them." I followed her into the living room, puzzled at her attire. Usually she was in after-ski clothes, which I was sure were from Saks Fifth Avenue. There she was wearing a too large brown turtleneck shirt, her husband's no doubt, a string of long, gaudy beads, and only one long gold earring. Instead of her well-fitting Bogners, she had on baggy ski pants and very high-heeled black patent leather slippers with sharp pointed toes. I followed her into the living room where our guests were seated around the fireplace. All of them were dressed more appropriately for the Astoria, than for ski tip. As Jeannie approached each guest with a wine, she would announce, I learned to dress up like this at Boying Mountain. Boyne is an expensive ski resort in northern Michigan. Looking up, I saw a young man coming trooping through, carrying a mattress with four youthful gymnasts following. They had laid the mattress on the floor at the far end of the room and proceeded to attempt some tumbling acts. The fireplace group sat open-mouthed, watching these barefooted rascals cavorting. However, the news writer was grinning and enjoying it all. A couple of weeks after everyone had gone home, Jeannie called from Chicago. You've got to hear this, Edna. She proceeded to read from the Chicago Tribune Society column. It was all about Jeannie and her family and how often they came to Ski Tip, what they wore on the mountain, what a charming place the lodge was, and not one mention of the group with whom the news writer had come. Before excellent air connections were common, most guests came by train. They would leave Chicago in the early evening, arrive in Denver around 8 a.m., and catch the 9 o'clock bus up to Arapahoe Basin, arriving there around 11:30 a.m. The eager ones would have changed into ski clothes on the train to be ready to ski the moment they arrived at the ski area, knowing Max and I would be there and could bring them home. New guests had been told to get off at the foot of Loveland Pass on the west side, cross over to the filling station, and call Ski Tip from there. Whoever was at the lodge would drive over and pick them up. It could be the cook, Oma, or sometimes a guest who had decided not to ski that day would happily oblige. One day around noon, when I'd stayed home on my day to cook, I heard a loud motor sound coming up our Montezuma Road. Being a mile from the main highway, we seldom had any articulated lorries, as one of the London guests called them. Here came a big Trailways bus, which turned into the front drive and drove right up to the walk, the only place that was free of snow. I was dumbfounded. Surely I didn't take a group I don't remember about, or did I? I tore out to the bus as the driver got out, explaining, I'm bringing you a guest. I've dropped so many of your guests off at Montezuma Road. I just had to come and see this place. I thanked him. Seeing how this guest was dressed, I realized the special delivery was necessary. Out of the bus tripped a young lady in a swirling satin skirt and golden sandals. The rest of the occupants of the bus were staring and laughing as I helped this young New Yorker into the lodge. She didn't have a bit of ski clothing, not even a sweater. When she left later in the week, I realized she had written in the guest book, thanks for all the borrowed warm ski clothes.